365 Days. This Day is a 2022 Polish erotic romance drama film directed by Barbara Białowież and Tomasz Mondes, the same filmmaking duo who brought the original 365 Days to the screen back in 2020. The film is a direct sequel to that first movie and serves as the second chapter in a trilogy based on the best-selling novels written by Polish author Blanka Lipinska. This particular installment is based on the second book in her series, titled Ten Zien, which translates to This Day in English, and that is exactly where the film gets its subtitle from. The movie was produced by Tomasz Mondes and was made through the Polish production companies Ekipa and Open Mind One. It was distributed globally by Netflix, which had already turned the first film into one of the platform's biggest word-of-mouth hits despite the wave of harsh criticism it received from professional critics. Given that success, Netflix commissioned this sequel along with a third and final film at the same time, meaning both were filmed back-to-back during production in 2021, largely on location in Poland and Italy. 365 Days. This Day premiered on Netflix on April 27, 2022, and runs for approximately 1 hour and 49 minutes. The film is primarily in Polish, with segments of English, Italian, and Spanish woven throughout to reflect its European settings and international cast of characters. It falls under the drama and romance genres, though its marketing and reputation lean heavily into the erotic thriller label that defined the franchise from the very beginning. Before diving into what happens in this second chapter, it helps to understand where the story is coming from. The original 365 Days was released theatrically in Poland in February 2020, and then made its way onto Netflix a few months later, where it exploded in popularity across the world almost overnight. That first film told the story of Laura Biel, a woman whose life takes a dark and controversial turn when she is kidnapped by Massimo Torricelli, a powerful and dangerous Sicilian mafia boss who gives her exactly 365 days to fall in love with him. The premise, drawn directly from Lipinska's provocative novel, sparked enormous debate online because of its explicit content and its romanticized portrayal of a relationship built on captivity and control. Regardless of the criticism, audiences could not stop watching, and the film became one of the most streamed titles on Netflix that year, which guaranteed that a sequel was inevitable. 365 Days. This Day picks up exactly where that story left off, following Laura and Massimo as they attempt to build a life together after the events of the first movie, only to discover that leaving behind danger, jealousy, and family obligations is far harder than either of them expected. Plot details. The story of 365 Days. This day begins with Laura and Massimo settling into what appears to be a stable and passionate relationship following the dramatic conclusion of the first film. On the surface, their romance looks stronger than ever, with the two of them finally engaged and preparing for a lavish wedding that Massimo insists must be perfect in every way. However, this sense of peace does not last long. Massimo's role as the head of a powerful Sicilian crime family means that his responsibilities are never far away, and as the wedding approaches, tensions within his own family begin to surface. Massimo's mother and other relatives view Laura with suspicion, unwilling to fully accept an outsider into their world, and their disapproval creates friction that Laura struggles to navigate even as she tries to prove her place at Massimo's side. At the same time, Massimo becomes increasingly consumed with business matters tied to his organization, pulling him away from Laura for long stretches and leaving her feeling isolated in a life that revolves entirely around his world rather than her own. Into this widening gap between the couple steps a new character named Nacho, played by Simone Cecina, who quickly becomes one of the central figures of the film. Nacho is introduced as a charming, attentive, and seemingly gentler presence compared to the possessive intensity that defines Massimo. He begins spending time with Laura, offering her the kind of attention, patience, and emotional openness that she feels is missing from her relationship with her fiancé. Their connection deepens over time, blurring the line between friendship and something more, and Laura finds herself torn between the man she is about to marry and the one who seems to understand her in ways Massimo does not. This love triangle becomes the emotional core of the film, as Laura wrestles with guilt, desire, and uncertainty about which version of her future she truly wants. Meanwhile, the criminal underworld that surrounds Massimo becomes increasingly dangerous. Rival factions and enemies from his past resurface, threatening not only his business but the safety of everyone close to him, including Laura. As the wedding draws nearer, Massimo becomes more secretive about the threats closing in, choosing to shield Laura from the truth rather than involve her, which only deepens the emotional distance between them. Laura, unaware of the full scope of what Massimo is dealing with, continues to lean on her growing bond with Nacho for comfort, unaware that Nacho's presence in her life is far from a coincidence and is tied to motives that go beyond simple attraction. The film builds toward a wedding sequence that becomes the dramatic centerpiece of the story, where long simmering tensions, hidden agendas, and violent confrontations from Massimo's criminal world all collide at once. Without giving away the full climax, the film ends on a cliffhanger that directly sets up the events of the third and final installment in the trilogy, leaving several major relationships and conflicts unresolved by design. Throughout the film, the narrative continues the franchise's signature blend of glamorous European settings, high fashion, luxury lifestyles, and intense romantic drama, all wrapped around themes of loyalty, jealousy, family loyalty within organized crime, and the emotional cost of choosing between security and freedom. Cast: Anna Maria Ciclocca returns in the leading role of Laura Torricelli, formerly Laura Beale, reprising the character that made her an internationally recognized actress after the first film's massive success. Ciclocca carries much of the emotional weight of the story in this sequel, as her character is forced to navigate conflicting loyalties, family pressure, and her own uncertainty about the life she has chosen. Michele Morrone once again plays Massimo Torricelli, the commanding and possessive mafia boss whose devotion to Laura is matched only by the danger that follows him everywhere he goes. Morrone had become something of a global sensation following the first movie, with his portrayal of Massimo turning him into a recognizable face and even launching a music career on the side, and this sequel continues to build on that established screen presence. Joining the returning leads is Simone Cecina in the pivotal new role of Nacho, the mysterious and magnetic figure who complicates Laura and Massimo's relationship throughout the film. Cecina's casting was one of the most talked about additions to the franchise, since his character effectively becomes the emotional wild card of the entire story and sets the stage for even greater complications in the trilogy's finale. Magdalena Lamparska also plays a significant role as Olga, Laura's close friend, who remains a steady presence throughout the chaos surrounding the wedding and Laura's personal struggles. The supporting cast includes additional characters tied to Massimo's family and criminal organization, further expanding the world first introduced in the original film. Behind the camera, the film was helmed by directors Barbara Bialawaz and Tomasz Mondes, with a screenplay credited to Tomasz Klimala, Bialawaz, Mondes, and original novelist Blanka Lipinska herself, ensuring that the film stayed closely tied to the source material she had created. Cinematography was handled by Bartek Cierlicka, editing was done by Marcin Drunowski, and the score was composed by Dominik Buczkowski-Wetaszek alongside Patrick Cumore, all contributing to the polished, glossy visual and audio style that had become a defining trademark of the franchise since its very first entry. Release date: 365 days. This day was officially released worldwide on Netflix on Wednesday, April 27, 2022. Netflix had confirmed earlier that year that both this sequel and the third film in the trilogy, eventually titled The Next 365 Days, would be released within the same calendar year, a decision made because the two films were shot consecutively during production. This approach allowed the streaming platform to capitalize on the momentum from the first film without making fans wait years between installments, and it set up an unusually fast turnaround for a franchise built on such a devoted and vocal fan base. The third film followed just months later, arriving on Netflix on August 19, 2022, bringing the trilogy to its conclusion in the same calendar year that this second chapter debuted. Trailer information. Netflix released the official trailer for 365 Days, this day a few weeks ahead of its premiere, giving fans their first proper look at how the story would continue after the events of the original film. The trailer opens on an intimate and charged moment between Laura and Massimo, immediately re-establishing the passionate tone the franchise had become known for, before shifting into scenes that hint at the growing tension within Massimo's family and the introduction of Nacho as a new and disruptive presence in Laura's life. The trailer was intentionally crafted to tease the love triangle at the heart of the film while also hinting at the criminal underworld conflicts that would escalate throughout the story, without revealing the specific details of the wedding sequence or the cliffhanger ending. Alongside the trailer, Netflix also published a first look at the film through its official blog, sharing photos and quotes from the cast and from author Blanka Lipinska, who spoke about wanting this chapter of Laura's story to explore themes of naivety, love, and the process of learning from one's mistakes in a relationship. The marketing rollout for the film leaned heavily into the same visual style that had defined the first movie, using its Mediterranean settings, luxury aesthetic, and the established chemistry between Cicluca and Morone to draw in the massive existing fan base while also promising a more layered and complicated story than before. Taken as a whole, 365 Days. This day represents a continuation of one of Netflix's most controversial yet commercially successful film franchises of the past several years. While it did not manage to replicate the same critical or cultural shockwave that the original film created back in 2020, it still drew significant viewership numbers upon release and kept the conversation around the trilogy alive heading into its final chapter. The film leans further into melodrama, jealousy, and the complications of blending a criminal empire with a romantic relationship, expanding the world of the first movie while deliberately leaving major threads open for resolution in the next 365 days. For fans of the franchise, this sequel serves as a bridge chapter, one that raises the emotional stakes considerably and introduces new characters and conflicts that reshape the dynamic between Laura and Massimo heading into the trilogy's conclusion. 365 Days. This day. Complete story explained. The story of 365 Days. This day opens on what should be the happiest day of Laura Beale's life, her wedding to Massimo Torricelli. After everything the two of them survived in the first film, from her abduction to the dangerous world of the Sicilian mafia she was pulled into, the wedding is meant to symbolize a new beginning, a moment where fear and captivity finally give way to genuine love freely chosen. The ceremony itself is staged with the same opulence that has defined the entire franchise, a lavish celebration filled with white flowers, designer gowns, champagne, and the kind of extravagant setting that only a man with Massimo's wealth and power could arrange. Guests from every corner of his empire gather to witness the union, family members, business associates, and old friends, all dressed in their finest, all aware on some level that this marriage is as much a political statement as it is a romantic one. Laura walks down the aisle radiant and hopeful, and for a brief moment the film allows its audience to believe that after everything, this couple might actually get their happy ending. The wedding sequence lingers on small, intimate details before pulling back to show the scale of the celebration, the estate transformed into a sea of white silk and candlelight, an orchestra playing as guests mingle beneath strings of soft lighting. Massimo watches Laura walk toward him with an expression the film frames as pure devotion, a man who once ruled through fear and control now standing utterly disarmed by the woman in front of him. For the audience who followed the tumultuous, controversial journey of the first film, this moment carries real emotional weight, a sense that two people who began their story in captivity and coercion have somehow found their way to something resembling genuine partnership. The reception that follows is filled with toasts, dancing, and the kind of extravagant indulgence that has become a signature of the franchise. But even amid the celebration, the film plants small, quiet moments that hint at the cracks still running beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect union. Even as the vows are exchanged and the rings are placed, the film makes clear that this happiness is built on a foundation still cracked by grief. In the closing moments of the first movie, Laura suffered the loss of her unborn child during a violent car accident, a tragedy that hangs over the wedding like an unspoken shadow. The film does not dwell on this loss with long, drawn-out scenes of mourning, but it threads the grief carefully into quieter moments. A flicker of sadness in Laura's eyes during the reception, a private exchange between her and Massimo where either of them quite says what they are feeling. There is a brief scene where Laura excuses herself from the celebration, retreating to a quiet corner of the estate gardens, her hand resting instinctively over her stomach as she allows herself a private moment of mourning before composing herself and returning to the festivities with a practiced smile. It becomes clear early on that this marriage, for all its glamour, is not simply a fairy tale continuation of the first film's romance. It is two people trying to rebuild something broken while pretending, at least in public, that everything is perfect. Once the wedding festivities fade and the newlyweds settle into married life, the film shifts into a rhythm of domesticity that feels almost jarring compared to the intensity of the franchise's earlier chapters. Laura now lives in Massimo's opulent estate, surrounded by staff, luxury, and every material comfort imaginable. Her mornings are framed in soft, golden light, waking alone in an enormous bed, being dressed by staff in designer clothing, wandering through rooms filled with art and antiques that feel more like a museum than a home. On paper, she has everything a person could want. Massimo, wanting to give her a sense of purpose and independence, hands her control of a clothing company, a business venture meant to keep her occupied and give her an identity beyond simply being his wife. Laura throws herself into this new role with enthusiasm at first, attending meetings, reviewing designs, and playing the part of a successful businesswoman navigating the fashion world, sitting at the head of long conference tables surrounded by designers and executives who treat her with the deference owed to Massimo Torricelli's wife rather than genuine professional respect. Yet despite the appearance of a full and glamorous life, something essential is missing, and Laura begins to feel the walls of her golden cage closing in around her. The source of her growing dissatisfaction is not hard to identify. Massimo, ever consumed by the responsibilities of running a criminal empire he inherited from his father, spends increasingly long hours away from home, buried in meetings, negotiations, and the kind of shadowy business dealings that come with controlling a Sicilian crime family. The film repeatedly shows Laura setting an elaborate table for two, only for Massimo's chair to remain empty as the candles burn low and the food grows cold, a visual motif the movie returns to again and again to underscore just how much of their marriage is defined by absence rather than presence. He is protective of Laura almost to a fault, surrounding her with security and insisting on knowing her every move, yet he remains emotionally distant, unwilling or unable to share the details of what keeps him away so often. When Laura presses him for answers about his long absences, he offers only vague reassurances about business complications, kissing her forehead and promising things will settle down soon, a promise that never quite materializes. Laura, left alone in a mansion full of staff but empty of real companionship, begins to feel the loneliness that so many of Massimo's previous partners must have felt before her. She waits for him at dinner tables that go cold, in bedrooms that stay empty long past midnight, and in a marriage that increasingly feels less like a partnership and more like an obligation she fulfills while Massimo tends to everything else in his life first. It is in this atmosphere of restlessness and quiet neglect that Laura first encounters the man who will become the emotional center of the film's central conflict. Working on the grounds of the Torricelli estate is a gardener, a handsome and easygoing man whom Laura comes to know simply as Nacho. Their first meeting is framed almost accidentally, Laura wandering the grounds alone one afternoon while Massimo is away, stumbling upon Nacho tending to the elaborate gardens that surround the estate. Unlike Massimo, who carries the weight of his empire in every conversation and every glance, Nacho is warm, playful, and refreshingly uncomplicated in his attention toward her. He teases her gently, treats her less like the untouchable wife of a powerful man and more like an actual person with thoughts and feelings worth engaging with. Their early interactions are innocent enough: brief conversations in the garden, a shared joke, a moment of connection that feels lighter than anything Laura has experienced in months. But as the weeks pass and Massimo's absences grow longer, these small moments with Nacho begin to mean more to Laura than she initially wants to admit. He listens to her in a way her husband does not. He makes her laugh in a way that feels effortless rather than performed. Slowly, without either of them fully acknowledging it, a bond begins to form between Laura and the man tending to Massimo's gardens, a bond built on the very things missing from her marriage: attention, patience, and emotional presence. The film takes care to develop this growing friendship across several scenes, showing Laura seeking out excuses to spend time near the gardens, offering Nacho drinks on hot afternoons, asking him questions about his life and his travels that reveal a curiosity in him she no longer extends toward her own husband. Nacho, for his part, seems to sense exactly what Laura is missing and positions himself as the antidote to it, always available, always attentive, never distracted by phone calls or business emergencies the way Massimo constantly is. There is a particular afternoon where Laura, feeling especially isolated after another cancelled dinner with Massimo, finds herself sitting on the grass beside Nacho as he works, the two of them talking for hours as the sun sets, a scene the film lingers on to emphasize just how easily this connection has begun to fill the emotional void in Laura's marriage. Throughout this stretch of the film, Laura's closest confidant remains her friend Olga, who serves as one of the few steady, grounding presences in her life amid the chaos of her marriage. Olga is not swept up in the same glamour that surrounds Laura's new existence, and she offers a perspective rooted in genuine concern rather than admiration for the wealth and luxury Laura now lives inside. In several scenes scattered throughout the first half of the film, Laura confides in Olga about her growing loneliness, her frustration with Massimo's constant absences, and her confusion over the feelings developing between her and Nacho. Olga listens with a mixture of sympathy and caution, gently warning Laura about the dangers of pursuing a relationship with someone connected to Massimo's household, even as she recognizes just how unhappy her friend has become. These conversations serve an important narrative function, allowing the audience to understand Laura's internal state more clearly than her often guarded interactions with Massimo ever could, and they reinforce the sense that Laura's drift toward Nacho is born out of genuine emotional need rather than simple impulsiveness or carelessness. The film also spends considerable time developing the day-to-day texture of Laura's new life running the clothing company Massimo has gifted her, using these business scenes to further illustrate the gap between the appearance of fulfillment and the reality of her isolation. Laura is shown reviewing fabric samples, approving design sketches, and sitting through presentations from creative directors eager to please the boss's wife, yet the film frames these scenes with a subtle emptiness, close-ups on Laura's face revealing boredom and distraction even as she nods along to conversations about hemlines and color palettes. It becomes increasingly apparent that this business, however generous a gift it may have been, functions less as a genuine outlet for Laura's ambitions and more as an elegant distraction, something to occupy her hours while Massimo attends to the business that actually matters to him. This dynamic adds another layer to the film's critique of a marriage built on material provision rather than authentic partnership, showing that even when Massimo attempts to address Laura's need for purpose, he does so in a way that keeps her safely contained within his world rather than genuinely empowered within it. The tension in Laura and Massimo's relationship reaches a breaking point at one of the lavish parties Massimo hosts as part of his business and social obligations. These parties are a recurring feature of the franchise, glittering affairs filled with wealthy guests, flowing alcohol, and an atmosphere of indulgence that mirrors the excess of Massimo's world. The film stages this particular party as a turning point, with Laura dressed in a stunning gown, playing hostess to a crowd of powerful men and glamorous women, trying her best to project the image of a confident, contented wife even as she scans the room searching for Massimo, who has once again disappeared into some corner of the estate to conduct business. At one such gathering, Laura's growing unease about her marriage crystallizes into something far more painful when she witnesses her husband in a compromising situation with a woman from his past, his former girlfriend Anna. The scene is devastating for Laura, not simply because of what she sees, but because of everything it confirms about the distance that has grown between her and Massimo. Whatever trust and security she thought she had built in their marriage suddenly feels fragile and uncertain. Anna, who reappears throughout the film as a lingering complication in Massimo and Laura's relationship, represents an unresolved piece of Massimo's history that Laura had hoped was firmly behind him, and her presence at the party reopens wounds that had never fully healed. The confrontation between Laura and Massimo in the aftermath of this discovery is one of the most emotionally charged sequences of the film's first half. Laura's hurt and anger colliding with Massimo's attempts to explain away what she saw, his insistence that nothing happened doing little to repair the damage already done to her trust. She retreats from the party in tears, and the image of her walking alone through the grand, empty corridors of the estate that night becomes one of the film's most quietly powerful moments, a portrait of a woman who has everything money can buy and still feels utterly alone. In the days following the party, Laura seeks out Olga once more, recounting what she saw and struggling to articulate the mixture of humiliation, grief, and anger churning inside her. Olga, ever the voice of caution, urges Laura to confront Massimo directly rather than allowing the wound to fester in silence. But Laura hesitates, unwilling to risk a confrontation that might force her to face the full truth of how fractured her marriage has become. This hesitation becomes a defining trait of Laura's arc throughout the middle portion of the film, a woman who has grown so accustomed to smoothing over conflict and maintaining appearances that she struggles to advocate for herself even when the stakes could not be higher. The film uses this dynamic to draw a subtle but pointed contrast between Laura and Olga, positioning Olga as someone willing to speak uncomfortable truths while Laura remains trapped in the role of dutiful, accommodating wife she has settled into since the wedding. Humiliated and heartbroken, Laura withdraws further from Massimo in the aftermath of the party, and it is in this emotional vacuum that her connection with Nacho deepens considerably. What began as innocent conversation in the garden evolves into something far more intimate, an emotional affair that edges closer and closer to becoming physical. Nacho, sensing Laura's vulnerability and unhappiness, becomes more deliberate in his attention toward her, arranging small gestures that Massimo, in his distraction, has long since abandoned, remembering details about her day, showing up with exactly the right words at exactly the right moment, offering the kind of steady emotional presence that Laura has been starving for throughout the film. The film frames their growing closeness with the same lush, romantic visual language it uses for Laura and Massimo, blurring the line between right and wrong, loyalty and desire, staging their scenes together with soft lighting, lingering glances, and a sense of forbidden intimacy that mirrors the passion of Laura's earlier scenes with her husband. Laura finds herself torn between the safety and history she shares with her husband and the freedom and lightness she feels whenever she is with Nacho. She does not immediately act on these feelings, wrestling instead with guilt and confusion, replaying her wedding vows in her mind even as she finds herself drawn back to the gardens again and again. But the emotional infidelity is unmistakable, and it sets the stage for a series of increasingly dramatic confrontations as the story continues. As Laura's personal life grows more complicated, the film simultaneously builds out the criminal and political tensions surrounding Massimo's empire. Since inheriting control of his family's organization, Massimo has worked tirelessly to expand and consolidate his power, forging alliances and navigating rivalries within the broader world of organized crime that connects Sicily to other criminal networks abroad, including the Torricelli family's dealings with associates in Mexico and Spain. The film intersperses scenes of Massimo in tense boardroom negotiations and hushed late-night phone calls, his jaw tight with barely controlled frustration as he fields threats from rivals and demands loyalty from subordinates, whose allegiance can no longer be fully trusted. Among these associates is a powerful figure known as Don Fernando, whose connections and influence stretch far beyond what Massimo initially realizes. What Laura and the audience do not yet understand is that Nacho's presence in her life is not the coincidence it appears to be. His placement as a gardener on the Torricelli estate, his easy access to Laura, and his growing emotional hold over her are all part of a larger scheme connected to Don Fernando's world, one that will not be fully revealed until much later in the story. For now, the film keeps this connection carefully hidden, allowing Nacho to exist in the narrative purely as a romantic complication rather than the more layered figure he will eventually be revealed to be. Massimo, for his part, is not oblivious to the growing distance in his marriage, even as he remains consumed by his responsibilities. He senses Laura's unhappiness and makes gestures meant to reassure her of his devotion, extravagant surprises, declarations of love, promises that things will change once the current business crisis passes. There is a sequence where he surprises Laura with an elaborate gift, an attempt to bridge the growing gap between them, and for a moment the film allows the audience to believe the couple might find their way back to each other. Yet these gestures increasingly ring hollow to Laura, who has heard similar promises before without seeing the follow-through she craves. The film uses these moments to underscore one of its central themes, the idea that wealth, luxury, and passionate declarations of love cannot substitute for genuine emotional presence and partnership. Massimo loves Laura fiercely, the film never questions that, but his inability to balance that love with the demands of his criminal empire creates the very vulnerability that allows Nacho, and the larger conspiracy surrounding him, to take root in Laura's life. The emotional stakes escalate further when Laura and Nacho's relationship moves beyond stolen glances and quiet conversations into something far more definitive. Whether through a private encounter away from the estate or a moment of vulnerability during one of Massimo's prolonged absences, Laura eventually crosses the line she had been circling for much of the film, allowing her connection with Nacho to become physical. This betrayal, even as the film frames it sympathetically given everything Laura has endured, marks a significant turning point in the story, cementing the love triangle that will drive the narrative toward its climax. In the moments that follow, the film shows Laura racked with guilt, staring at her reflection in a mirror as though searching for the version of herself that existed before the wedding, before the loneliness, before this betrayal that she cannot take back. She is left grappling with profound guilt over her actions, torn between the man she married and the man who has made her feel seen and wanted in ways her marriage no longer provides. The audience is left to wonder whether Massimo will discover this betrayal, and if he does, what it might mean for the fragile peace the couple has built. As the film moves into its second half, the criminal conspiracy that has been quietly simmering in the background begins to surface with greater urgency. Massimo becomes aware of threats circling his organization, whispers of betrayal and shifting loyalties among people he once trusted. Phone calls grow more urgent, meetings grow more tense, and the film shows Massimo's inner circle beginning to fracture under the weight of suspicion, with men who once seemed unquestionably loyal now eyed with wary uncertainty. He grows increasingly paranoid and protective of Laura, tightening security around her even as he struggles to identify exactly where the danger is coming from. This period of heightened tension coincides with Laura's own emotional turmoil, creating a household filled with unspoken fears, guilty secrets, and mounting suspicion on both sides. Massimo cannot shake the feeling that something is deeply wrong, both within his business dealings and within his marriage, though he cannot yet articulate exactly what that wrongness is. Laura, meanwhile, becomes increasingly anxious about the possibility of her affair being discovered, aware that in Massimo's world, betrayal is rarely met with anything less than severe consequences, flinching at unexpected footsteps in the hallway and rehearsing explanations for absences she hopes she will never have to give. Alongside the emotional drama unfolding between Laura, Massimo, and Nacho, the film continues to deepen its portrayal of the criminal world surrounding the Torricelli family, offering glimpses into the internal politics of Massimo's organization that hint at just how precarious his position has become. Longtime associates, whose loyalty once seemed unshakable, begin exchanging guarded glances in Massimo's presence, and the film stages several tense meetings where Massimo, flanked by his closest men, negotiates with representatives from allied and rival factions alike, each conversation laced with unspoken threat beneath a veneer of polite formality. These scenes are shot with a colder, more clinical visual style than the warm, sun-drenched romance sequences involving Laura, reinforcing the sense of two entirely different worlds existing under the same roof, one of passion and heartbreak, the other of calculation and danger, with Massimo forced to move fluidly between them even as the boundaries separating the two begin to blur dangerously. It is at this point in the story that the film introduces its most significant twist, one that recontextualizes much of what has come before. Laura, believing she is spending time with her husband, finds herself confronted by a man who looks exactly like Massimo but whose behavior feels subtly, unsettlingly wrong, colder in his affection, sharper in his words, missing the small familiar mannerisms she has come to know so intimately over their time together. When she confronts him about his coldness or his strange behavior, accusing him of cheating or of pulling away from her once again, the man reveals a truth that shatters everything Laura thought she understood about her husband's family. He is not Massimo at all. He is Adriano, Massimo's identical twin brother, a sibling whose existence had been deliberately hidden from Laura throughout their entire relationship. The revelation of Adriano recontextualizes much of the film's earlier tension, suggesting that some of Massimo's stranger, colder behavior may not have belonged to Massimo at all, but to his brother impersonating him at key moments without Laura's knowledge. The horror on Laura's face as this realization sinks in mirrors the audience's own disorientation, forcing a re-examination of earlier scenes that suddenly take on new and unsettling meaning. Adriano explains that he was born mere minutes after Massimo, a difference in time that nonetheless determined the entire trajectory of both their lives. Because Massimo was born first, he was the one to inherit their father's criminal empire upon his death, leaving Adriano in his brother's shadow despite their identical bloodline and, in Adriano's mind, his equal right to the family's power and legacy. This resentment festered over the years into something far darker than simple sibling rivalry, evolving into a deep and dangerous obsession with reclaiming what Adriano believes should rightfully be his. The film gives Adriano a chilling, unsettling energy throughout these scenes, his physical resemblance to Massimo making his menace all the more disturbing, a familiar face twisted into something dangerous and unpredictable. Adriano's mental instability becomes increasingly apparent as his role in the story expands. He is not simply a man seeking his fair share of an inheritance. He is someone whose grievances have curdled into something closer to a desire for total destruction, aimed specifically at everything Massimo holds dear. Recognizing that the most effective way to wound his brother is not through direct confrontation but through the people Massimo loves, Adriano sets his sights on Laura, understanding that hurting her would inflict a pain on Massimo far greater than any business setback ever could. To accomplish this, Adriano has been working in secret alliance with Don Fernando, the same powerful figure connected to Nacho's mysterious placement in Laura's life. Together, the two men have been orchestrating a conspiracy designed to infiltrate the Torricelli family from multiple angles at once, using Nacho to destabilize Laura and Massimo's marriage from within while Adriano works to seize control of the empire itself, a two-pronged attack designed to leave Massimo weakened both personally and professionally at the exact same moment. This revelation forces Laura to reckon with the terrifying realization that she has been living inside a carefully constructed trap for much of the film, unable to distinguish between the man she married and the increasingly unstable brother who has been circling her life. The horror of this discovery is compounded by the knowledge that her own emotional vulnerabilities, her loneliness, her hurt over Massimo's distance and his history with Anna, were precisely the conditions that made her susceptible to Nacho's carefully calculated attention. What she believed was a genuine emotional connection now appears, at least in part, to be woven into a much larger and more sinister design, even as the film leaves some ambiguity about how much of Nacho's affection for her, if any, was real. Laura is left questioning every tender moment she shared with Nacho, wondering how much of it was genuine feeling and how much was calculated manipulation in service of a plot she never saw coming. In the wake of Laura's confrontation with Adriano, the film shifts back to Massimo, showing him growing increasingly frantic as he begins piecing together fragments of intelligence suggesting that something is deeply wrong within his own organization. He questions his most trusted men one by one, demanding answers about unexplained absences, unfamiliar faces spotted near the estate, and financial irregularities that suggest resources have been quietly diverted without his knowledge. These scenes are shot with mounting intensity, Massimo pacing the halls of his own home like a man who no longer trusts the walls around him, his usual composure fraying visibly as the sense of betrayal within his own ranks becomes impossible to ignore. When word eventually reaches him that his brother, a man he believed long estranged and irrelevant to his current life, has resurfaced and may be connected to the growing threats against his family, the revelation lands as a gut punch, forcing Massimo to reckon with a past he had long since buried and hoped never to confront again. The film uses this section to briefly flash back to fragments of Massimo and Adriano's shared childhood, hinting at a father who ruled his sons with the same iron control he applied to his criminal empire, favoring Massimo from a young age simply by virtue of the 10 minutes that separated their births. These glimpses are brief and impressionistic rather than fully explained, but they are enough to suggest that Adriano's resentment did not emerge overnight, but was cultivated across a lifetime of being treated as the lesser son in a family where birth order determined everything, from inheritance to identity itself. Massimo's own guilt over this dynamic becomes apparent in his reaction to learning of his brother's return, a complicated mixture of anger, fear, and something almost like grief for a relationship that never had the chance to become anything other than rivalry. As Massimo becomes aware of the danger closing in around his wife, the film accelerates into its most tense and action-driven sequences. Realizing that Adriano and Don Fernando's forces pose an immediate and serious threat, Massimo works desperately to secure Laura's safety, coordinating with his own network of loyal men to shield her from harm. There is a moment of confusion and danger when Laura is taken by men she initially believes are working for her protection, only for it to become unclear who exactly controls her fate in that moment, Massimo's trusted allies or the forces working against him. Nacho, watching this unfold, realizes that Laura has been taken by people other than the ones he expected, a moment that suggests even he has been outmaneuvered by the depth of Adriano and Don Fernando's scheme. Someone else has entered the game entirely, one whose loyalties belong solely to Massimo. This confusion underscores just how deeply Adriano and Don Fernando's conspiracy has infiltrated Massimo's world, blurring the lines between safety and danger even for those closest to the situation. Laura is eventually brought face to face with the full scope of the danger surrounding her, confronted directly by Adriano in a setting far removed from the safety of the Torricelli estate. In this climactic confrontation, the full weight of the conspiracy comes crashing down at once: Adriano's resentment toward his brother, his willingness to use Laura as a weapon against Massimo, and his unstable, increasingly desperate need to seize control of everything Massimo has built. The confrontation grows violent, reflecting the film's willingness to pair its romantic melodrama with the brutal, high-stakes violence that defines the criminal underworld at the heart of the franchise. Gunfire, physical struggle, and desperate attempts at escape fill these final sequences as Massimo races against time to reach Laura before Adriano's instability turns fully lethal. Nacho, whose loyalties throughout the film have remained deliberately ambiguous, reappears during this climactic sequence, his true allegiances and intentions finally coming into sharper focus even as the film stops short of fully resolving every question surrounding his character. Massimo, racing against time once he learns the location where Laura is being held, assembles a team of his most loyal remaining men for a rescue operation that carries the same urgency and desperation that defined his search for her in the very first film, only now complicated by the horrifying knowledge that the man holding her hostage wears his own face. The film draws out the tension of this rescue sequence deliberately, cutting between Massimo's approach and Laura's increasingly desperate attempts to reason with Adriano, whose grip on rational thought seems to slip further with every passing moment. Adriano oscillates unpredictably between moments of eerie calm, speaking to Laura with a warped tenderness that echoes his brother's own affection for her, and sudden bursts of rage whenever she resists him or invokes Massimo's name, a volatility that makes him all the more dangerous and unpredictable in these final confrontations. Laura, drawing on the resilience she has shown throughout both films, refuses to be entirely passive in this final ordeal, attempting to stall for time, searching for any opportunity to escape or alert someone to her location, even as the odds remain stacked heavily against her. The confrontation escalates into a moment of genuine peril for Laura, one that leaves her gravely injured by the film's final act. Whether through direct violence at the hands of Adriano, collateral damage from the broader conflict between the rival factions, or a combination of both, Laura is left in critical condition, her fate suddenly and shockingly uncertain after everything she has endured throughout the story. As the chaos of the confrontation subsides, Nacho makes his exit from the scene, his role in the unfolding tragedy left deliberately unresolved, a loose thread the film chooses not to tie up in this installment, his final glance back toward Laura carrying a weight of unspoken feeling the film never fully explains. In the film's final and most emotionally charged image, it is Massimo who is left holding Laura, cradling her in his arms as her condition hangs precariously in the balance, the extravagant wealth and power that define his entire world suddenly meaningless in the face of the possibility of losing the woman he loves. His face in this final moment strips away every ounce of the composed, controlled mafia boss the audience has come to know, leaving only a desperate, grieving man begging for the one thing his money and power cannot guarantee him. In the immediate aftermath of the violence, the film slows its pace considerably, lingering on the wreckage of the confrontation, overturned furniture, shattered glass, the distant wail of approaching sirens, and the eerie quiet that follows chaos once the adrenaline has drained away. Massimo's men move through the space securing the perimeter while Massimo himself remains entirely focused on Laura, oblivious to anything happening around him beyond the rise and fall of her breathing. The film strips away the score almost entirely in this sequence, allowing the silence to underscore the gravity of the moment far more effectively than any swelling musical cue could, a deliberate choice that stands in contrast to the heightened, music-driven romance and action that has defined much of the rest of the film. It is a moment of stark, unadorned vulnerability for a character who has spent 2 films now defined by his control, his wealth, and his power, none of which mean anything to him in this instant beyond their ability, or inability, to save the one person he cannot bear to lose. The film closes on this note of unresolved tension and heartbreak, deliberately withholding confirmation of whether Laura survives her injuries. This cliffhanger ending is a calculated choice, designed to propel audiences directly into the franchise's third and final installment, where the fallout from Adriano's betrayal, the true nature of Nacho's role in the conspiracy, and the ultimate fate of Laura and Massimo's relationship are set to be addressed. Throughout its runtime, 365 days, this day expands the world established in the first film considerably, introducing new layers of family betrayal, criminal conspiracy, and emotional complexity to a story that began as a more straightforward, if controversial, romance between a captor and his captive. By the end of this second chapter, the simple binary of victim and captor from the original film has given way to a much more tangled web of loyalty, deception, and desire, one where nearly every character's true motivations remain at least partially obscured. At its core, despite the added layers of mafia intrigue and family betrayal, the film remains fundamentally focused on the emotional journey of its two central characters, Laura and Massimo, and the question of whether genuine love can survive the corrosive effects of distance, jealousy, and deception. Laura's arc throughout the film traces her evolution from a woman grateful simply to have escaped danger and found love, into someone increasingly aware of her own needs and unwilling to settle for a relationship defined solely by luxury and protection without genuine partnership. Her connection with Nacho, whatever its ultimate origins and motivations, forces her to confront the emptiness she has been avoiding within her marriage, even as it leads her into far greater danger than she ever anticipated. The film never fully condemns Laura for her choices, instead framing her as a woman failed by a partner who mistook material provision for emotional presence, even as it does not shy away from showing the painful consequences of the path she chose to walk. Massimo's arc, meanwhile, illustrates the cost of his relentless focus on power and control, showing how his inability to fully open himself emotionally to Laura, even while professing intense love and devotion, creates the very vulnerabilities that nearly cost him everything. His journey across the film is one of slow, painful realization, watching the woman he built an entire empire to protect slip further away from him precisely because he never learned to protect the one thing money could never buy, her sense of being truly known and truly chosen every single day, not just on their wedding day. The introduction of Adriano as Massimo's secret twin brother adds a layer of tragedy to the story as well, suggesting that the ruthless, controlling world Massimo inherited from his father has claimed more than one victim within his own family. Adriano's descent into obsession and violence can be read as a dark mirror to Massimo's own journey in the first film, a man shaped and ultimately consumed by the same culture of power, inheritance, and violence that defines the Torricelli family legacy. Where Massimo channeled that legacy into a possessive, controlling love for Laura, Adriano channels it into pure destruction, unable to separate his desire for power from his need to annihilate everything his brother holds dear. This parallel gives the film's central conspiracy an emotional weight beyond simple plot mechanics, framing the entire conflict as a family tragedy playing out against the backdrop of glamorous European settings and high-stakes criminal drama. It also raises uncomfortable questions the film leaves largely unanswered, about how a father's decision to favor one twin over another in matters of inheritance could so thoroughly warp one's son into an instrument of vengeance, and about what role, if any, Massimo played in allowing that resentment to fester unaddressed for so many years. The film's handling of Nacho as a character remains one of its most deliberately unresolved threads. Throughout the story, he is presented with enough warmth and genuine seeming affection toward Laura that audiences are left uncertain whether his feelings for her developed independently of his assignment within Don Fernando's scheme, or whether every tender moment between them was calculated from the very beginning as part of a larger plan to destabilize the Torricelli marriage. This ambiguity is almost certainly intentional, designed to keep audiences invested in the character heading into the franchise's final installment, where his true motivations and the depth of his feelings for Laura are expected to finally come into focus. His abrupt exit from the climactic confrontation, leaving Laura's fate uncertain without a clear resolution to his own arc, reinforces just how much of this film functions as a bridge chapter rather than a self-contained story, prioritizing the setup of future conflict over the tidy resolution of its own. The character of Don Fernando, though he appears less directly on screen than Adriano or Nacho, casts a long shadow over the entire second half of the film as the architect quietly pulling strings from a distance. The film characterizes him as a man of considerable influence within the international criminal networks that intersect with the Torricelli family's own operations, someone whose reach extends across borders and whose motivations, unlike Adriano's deeply personal vendetta, appear rooted more in cold calculation and the pursuit of territorial advantage. His alliance with Adriano is framed as mutually beneficial rather than born of any genuine loyalty, each man using the other to achieve separate goals. Adriano his revenge against Massimo, Don Fernando a weakened and destabilized rival organization ripe for exploitation. This dynamic adds a layer of geopolitical intrigue to the film's central conspiracy, suggesting that the danger facing Laura and Massimo extends well beyond a single embittered brother, and into a much wider web of criminal ambition that the franchise's concluding chapter will presumably need to address in greater depth. By the time the credits roll, 365 days, this day has successfully expanded its world while leaving audiences with far more questions than answers. Laura's survival remains uncertain, Nacho's true loyalties and feelings remain only partially clarified, and the full extent of Don Fernando's ambitions within the criminal underworld remains an open thread. What is clear, however, is that the fragile happiness glimpsed at the film's opening wedding has been thoroughly shattered by its conclusion, replaced by a world of betrayal, hidden identities, and violence that threatens to consume everything Laura and Massimo built together. The film sets the stage perfectly for its concluding chapter, promising resolution to the central love triangle, closure on the fate of Adriano's conspiracy, and most urgently for audiences left on the edge of their seats, an answer to the question of whether Laura survives the injuries that leave her in Massimo's arms as the story comes to its dramatic close. In many ways, the film functions less as a complete story in its own right and more as the middle act of a much larger tragedy, one where every character's choices in this chapter, Laura's affair, Massimo's neglect, Adriano's obsession, and Nacho's hidden agenda, converge to set the stage for a final reckoning still to come. Viewed within the broader context of the trilogy, 365 Days, this day occupies a difficult position as a middle chapter, tasked with escalating the stakes established in the first film while simultaneously planting the seeds for the story's ultimate resolution in the franchise's third installment. This kind of narrative bridge work often comes at a cost, and the film's structure reflects that tension, spending considerable time establishing new characters and conspiracies that pay off more in setup than in payoff by the time its own credits roll. Audiences who came to the franchise for the intense, singularly focused romance between Laura and Massimo that defined the original film may find the sequel's expanded cast and subplots a significant tonal shift, trading some of the claustrophobic intensity of the first story for a broader, more sprawling narrative involving family betrayal, criminal conspiracy, and a love triangle that complicates the central relationship considerably. Whether this expansion strengthens or dilutes the emotional core of Laura and Massimo's story is very much a matter of individual interpretation, but it undeniably reshapes the franchise's trajectory heading into its final chapter. The performances anchoring this expanded narrative remain central to whatever emotional resonance the film achieves. Anna Maria Cicluca continues to carry the weight of Laura's inner conflict with a performance that leans heavily into vulnerability, her expressions doing much of the work to convey the loneliness, guilt, and fear that define Laura's journey across the film even in scenes with minimal dialogue. Michel Morone, meanwhile, is tasked with portraying a man torn between two identities in more ways than one, both the devoted husband struggling to hold his marriage together, and eventually, the sinister brother whose menace must feel both familiar and deeply unsettling. The demands of playing both Massimo and Adriano within the same film add a layer of technical challenge to Morone's performance that becomes especially apparent once the twin brother twist is revealed, requiring subtle shifts in posture, tone, and expression to distinguish between the two men even as they share an identical face. Simone Cecina, in his introduction to the franchise as Nacho, brings an easy charisma to the role that makes Laura's growing attachment to him entirely believable, while leaving just enough shadow beneath the charm to keep audiences guessing about his true intentions until the film's final act forces those questions into the open. Visually, the film continues the franchise's established aesthetic of pairing its dramatic storyline with a travelogue-like appreciation for luxury and location, moving between opulent estate interiors, sun-soaked gardens, glittering party settings, and the tense, shadowed spaces where the story's criminal conspiracy plays out. This visual contrast reinforces the film's thematic interest in surface versus substance, the gleaming, beautiful world Laura inhabits concealing currents of danger, deception, and heartbreak running just beneath its polished exterior. The film's soundtrack, blending contemporary pop and moodier atmospheric tracks, underscores both the romantic and the tense sequences, though it occasionally competes for attention with the drama unfolding on screen rather than simply supporting it, a minor but noticeable element of the film's overall presentation. Ultimately, 365 Days. This day functions as a story about the fragility of happiness built too quickly on top of trauma, control, and unresolved family wounds. Laura and Massimo begin the film exchanging vows meant to symbolize a fresh start, yet by the film's end, that fresh start has been almost entirely undone by secrets, betrayals, and a family conspiracy either of them saw coming. The film asks its audience to sit with genuine uncertainty about whether this couple, and Laura herself, will survive what has been set in motion, refusing the easy comfort of resolution in favor of a cliffhanger designed to make the wait for the franchise's conclusion feel as urgent and unbearable as possible. Whatever one makes of its melodrama, its pacing, or its handling of its expanded cast of characters, the film succeeds in leaving its audience with real stakes heading into the trilogy's final chapter, a rare achievement for a middle installment tasked with so much narrative heavy lifting in service of a story still waiting for its true conclusion. The cast of 365 Days. This Day, Complete Life Stories. Michele Morrone. Michele Morrone was born on October 3, 1990, in the town of Bitonto, located in the Apulia region in the southeast of Italy. He was the youngest of 4 children and grew up with 3 older sisters in a working-class household. His mother, Angela, worked as a seamstress, while his father, Natale, worked in construction. When Michele and his siblings were still young, the family made the decision to relocate north to Melegnano, a town near Milan in the Lombardy region, in search of better job opportunities. A common story for many Italian families from the south during that era who moved north chasing more stable work and a better standard of living. This move meant that although Morrone was born in Apulia, much of his childhood and adolescence actually unfolded in Lombardy, giving him a blended sense of identity between the region of his birth and the region where he came of age. Life took a difficult turn for the Morrone family in 2003, when Michele's father passed away. He was only 12 years old at the time, an age where the loss of a parent leaves a particularly lasting impact, and this early experience with grief is often cited as a formative moment in shaping the intensity and emotional depth he would later be known for bringing to his performances. Around this same period in his early life, a chance encounter with a Harry Potter film sparked something in the 11-year-old Michele, planting the first seed of interest in acting as a potential path for his future. What began as a child's fascination with the magic of cinema soon turned into something more concrete when he started participating in an after-school drama program at his middle school, giving him his first real taste of performing in front of an audience. Morrone's path through his teenage years was not entirely smooth. He was held back in his first year of high school due to behavioral issues, a detail he has spoken about candidly in interviews over the years as part of a broader, honest reflection on a youth that was not without its struggles and detours. Rather than letting this setback define him, he eventually found his way to more serious, structured training in the craft of acting, enrolling in a professional theater program at the historic Teatro Fraschini in the city of Pavia. It was here that Morrone began to develop the discipline and technical foundation that would carry him into a professional acting career, learning the fundamentals of stagecraft and performance in an environment steeped in Italian theatrical tradition. His professional acting career formally began in 2011, when he landed the role of Riccardo in a 3-episode web series called Second Chance, directed by Pier Giorgio Sedita. Although the series was cancelled after its first season, it gave Morrone valuable early experience and a foothold in the industry. The following year, he appeared in a music video for the Italian girl group Macchi, a small but notable step that hinted at the musical side of his career that would later become such a significant part of his public identity. Through the early to mid-2010s, Morrone steadily built his resume, taking on lead roles in short films including Il tempo di una sigaretta and I la vita continua, and gradually working his way into Italian television. He appeared in a range of Italian series and productions during this period, including Come un Delfino, Provesai ancora prof, the crime drama Squadra Anti-Mafia, the series Siren, and the television film Renata Font. His profile within Italy continued to rise through the back half of the decade with appearances in the legal drama Il Processo and the historical series Medici in 2018. These years working steadily but without major breakout recognition are an important part of understanding Morrone's eventual success, since they represent nearly a full decade of consistent effort within the Italian entertainment industry before international fame arrived. Unlike performers who experience a single dramatic breakthrough early in their careers, Morrone spent his 20s accumulating a wide range of television and short film credits, working with numerous different directors and production teams across a variety of genres, from crime dramas to historical fiction. This extended period of steady, if modest, work gave him the kind of professional resilience and adaptability that would later serve him well once the demands of international stardom arrived all at once. Colleagues and directors who worked with him during this period have often noted his work ethic and discipline, qualities that trace back to the structured theatrical training he received early in his career at Teatro Fraschini. One particularly notable moment in Morrone's pre-fame career came in 2016, when he competed in the 11th season of Ballando con le Stelle, the Italian version of Dancing with the Stars, ultimately finishing in second place. This experience introduced him to a broader Italian television audience beyond the world of scripted drama, and showcased a different side of his talent and screen presence. In 2019, he took on the lead role of Luigi in the film Bar Giuseppe, continuing to build momentum in Italian cinema even as international recognition still remained just out of reach. That international breakthrough arrived in dramatic fashion in 2020, when Morrone was cast as Massimo Torricelli, a powerful and dangerous Sicilian mafia boss, in the Netflix erotic drama 365 Days. The film premiered theatrically in Poland in February of that year before making its way onto Netflix in June, and what followed was an almost unprecedented wave of global attention. Morrone became an overnight sensation across the world, his face and his portrayal of Massimo turning him into one of the most talked about new stars in international entertainment. Following the success of the first film, he signed a 3-year contract with the production company that led him to film both sequels, 365 Days, This Day and the Next 365 Days, back-to-back, cementing his place at the center of one of Netflix's most streamed and most controversial franchises. Notably, in the sequel 365 Days, This Day, Morrone took on the added challenge of portraying not just Massimo but also his previously unknown identical twin brother Adriano, a dual role that required him to distinguish two characters sharing the same face through subtle differences in demeanor and performance. Beyond acting, Morrone has built a substantial career as a musician. He taught himself to play guitar at the age of 25, largely by watching instructional videos online, and channeled that self-taught skill into a full musical career that runs parallel to his acting work. In February of 2020, right around the same time 365 Days was capturing global attention, he released his debut album titled Dark Room, produced by the label Agora SA, which included several songs that became part of the film's official soundtrack. One of these tracks, Feel It, became particularly popular, with its music video featuring scenes alongside his 365 Days co-star Anna Maria Ciclucca. Morrone has continued releasing music in the years since, including the album Double in 2023, along with a steady stream of singles that have found chart success across various European markets. His YouTube channel, which he joined in January of 2020, has grown into a substantial platform in its own right, amassing millions of subscribers and hundreds of millions of views, with his music video for Hard for Me standing as his most watched upload. The timing of Marone's entry into music, arriving at almost the exact same moment as his sudden acting fame, created a unique career dynamic in which his musical identity and his most famous acting role became permanently intertwined in the public imagination. Many newcomers to his work first encountered him as Massimo before discovering that the same face belonged to an artist releasing original songs, and this crossover effect helped his music find an audience far more quickly than might otherwise have been possible for a first-time recording artist without an established acting profile. Over time, however, Marone has worked to establish his music as a distinct creative outlet in its own right, touring internationally, performing live shows in front of large audiences, and continuing to write and release new material well beyond the initial wave of attention generated by his breakout film role. Marone has also ventured into entrepreneurship, launching a women's beachwear clothing brand called Aurum Roma in August of 2020. He personally collaborates on the designs alongside fashion designer Chiara Pilano, and the brand generated so much interest upon its announcement that its website reportedly crashed under the volume of traffic. This business venture reflects a broader pattern in Marone's career of extending his personal brand across multiple creative and commercial avenues rather than confining himself strictly to acting. On a personal level, Marone married Ruba Sada, a Lebanese stylist, in 2014, with the couple holding civil marriage ceremonies in both Italy and Lebanon. The marriage produced 2 sons, born in 2014 and 2017 respectively, and Marone has spoken openly in interviews about how central fatherhood is to his sense of identity and purpose. He and Sada eventually divorced in 2018, a period he has described as emotionally difficult, though he has generally kept the more granular details of his personal life private even as his public profile grew exponentially in the years that followed. In the time since 365 Days catapulted him to global fame, Marone has continued expanding his filmography with projects including the 2024 film Subservience and a string of releases in 2025, further establishing himself as a working actor beyond the franchise that made him a household name. Looking at the arc of his career as a whole, Marone's story is ultimately one of a performer who spent the better part of a decade building fundamentals in theater, short films, and Italian television before a single role transformed his life almost overnight. The years of quieter, less visible work laid a foundation of discipline and craft that allowed him to handle the sudden and often overwhelming demands of international fame once it arrived, and his subsequent expansion into music, fashion entrepreneurship, and a broader international acting career suggests a performer intent on building a lasting, multifaceted public career rather than simply riding the momentum of a single viral role. Anna Maria Ciclucca. Anna Maria Ciclucca was born on May 31, 1992, in Lublin, the largest city in eastern Poland. Her father, Jerzy Antoni Ciclucki, works as a lawyer, and she grew up in a household that valued education and discipline, though she has generally kept the finer details of her upbringing and family life away from public scrutiny even after achieving international fame. Long before the world came to know her as Laura Beale, Ciclucca pursued her education with a clear focus on the performing arts, eventually enrolling at the Wrocław-based Faculty of Puppetry of the AST National Academy of Theatre Arts, one of Poland's most respected institutions for dramatic training. She graduated from this program in 2018, having spent years developing a foundation in theatrical performance that stood in stark contrast to the overnight, viral nature of the fame that would soon follow. Ciclucca's linguistic abilities also set her apart even before her acting career took off internationally, as she developed fluency not only in her native Polish but also in English, French, and German, a skill set that would later prove useful as her career expanded beyond Poland's borders and into international productions with multilingual casts and settings. Her early professional path followed the trajectory of many serious Polish actors, built primarily around stage work and theatrical training rather than a rush toward screen credits. This grounding in theater gave her a level of technical preparation that many first-time film actors lack, even though her name remained largely unknown outside of Poland's theatrical circles for the first several years of her career. The specific focus of her training, within the Faculty of Puppetry at the AST National Academy, is worth noting as an unusual and demanding specialization within the broader field of dramatic education. Puppetry-based theatrical training in the Polish academic tradition tends to place significant emphasis on physical control, precision of movement, and the ability to convey emotion and narrative through means beyond simply spoken dialogue, since puppetry performance often requires an actor to express character and story through an intermediary object rather than their own face and voice alone. This kind of rigorous physical and expressive training arguably gave Szykłaka tools that extended well beyond what a more conventional acting program might have offered, equipping her with a heightened sensitivity to physicality and nonverbal communication that would later serve her well in a film role defined heavily by silence, glances, and unspoken emotional tension between two central characters. Her first notable appearance on Polish television came in October of 2019, when she appeared in a single episode of Na Do by Na Źle, a long-running Polish medical drama series centered on the lives of paramedics and hospital staff. This brief television appearance served as a relatively modest entry point into screen acting, giving little indication of the scale of the fame that awaited her just a few months later. Everything changed when Szykłaka was cast in the lead role of Laura Beale in the 2020 Netflix film 365 Days, opposite Michelle Morone. The film, based on the controversial and wildly popular novel by Polish author Blanka Lipinska, told the story of a woman kidnapped by a powerful Sicilian mafia boss who gives her exactly 1 year to fall in love with him. Szykłaka has spoken about the significant challenges involved in filming a role that demanded such intense emotional and physical vulnerability, describing the experience as difficult but ultimately one that pushed her artistically in ways her theatrical training had not fully prepared her for. The film's release proved to be a genuine cultural phenomenon, and despite widespread negative reviews from professional critics, it became one of the most watched titles on Netflix in 2020. Propelling Szykłaka from a relatively unknown theater graduate into one of the most recognized faces in European entertainment almost overnight. This kind of rapid, viral fame presented its own unique set of challenges, thrusting a classically trained stage actress into the middle of intense global scrutiny, tabloid speculation, and a level of public attention that few could have adequately prepared for. Szykłaka has generally handled this attention with a notable degree of privacy and restraint, choosing not to share extensive details about her personal life or relationships even as public curiosity about her grew substantially following the success of the franchise. The scale of the reaction to 365 Days created an unusual professional situation for Szykłaka, since the film's explicit content and controversial premise generated intense debate online even as it drove record viewership numbers. She has spoken in past interviews about the pressure of stepping into a role that demanded both significant emotional exposure and physical vulnerability, particularly as a performer making her feature film debut without the benefit of prior screen experience to draw on. Rather than allowing the controversy surrounding the film's content to define her public narrative entirely, Szykłaka has consistently redirected conversations toward the technical and emotional craft involved in her performance, emphasizing the discipline and preparation that went into portraying Laura's transformation across the story rather than dwelling on the more sensational aspects of the film's reception. She reprised her role as Laura in both sequels, 365 Days, This Day, released in April of 2022, and the next 365 Days, released later that same year in August, completing the trilogy that had defined the first several years of her screen career. Throughout these sequels, her performance continued to anchor the emotional core of the franchise, tasked with portraying Laura's evolving journey from a woman initially defined by fear and captivity into someone navigating far more complex questions of loyalty, desire, and personal agency within her relationship with Massimo. Even as the franchise brought her extraordinary visibility, Ciclocca has continued to express interest in pursuing acting work beyond the 365 Days universe, returning periodically to her theatrical roots. Among her post-franchise stage work is a role as Death in Margiels, Ausencia, a biographical play centered on the life of Ludwik Margiels, a celebrated Polish-born theater, opera, and film director who had a significant career in Mexico. This return to the stage reflects a clear desire on Ciclocca's part to be recognized as a serious dramatic performer with range extending well beyond the role that made her internationally famous. This deliberate movement back and forth between blockbuster streaming success and smaller, more artistically driven theatrical work marks one of the more distinctive aspects of Ciclocca's career trajectory compared to many performers who find themselves defined by a single breakout franchise role. Rather than treating her theatrical background as a stepping stone she has since outgrown, she has continued to draw on it directly, taking on stage roles that allow for a very different kind of creative expression than the polished, heavily produced world of a major streaming franchise. This dual identity, moving between the intimacy of live theater performance and the scale of one of the most watched film franchises in recent memory, gives her career a breadth that many of her peers who rose to fame through a single viral hit have not been able to replicate. Ciclocca has remained notably guarded about her romantic life throughout her rise to fame, an unusual position for someone whose most famous role involves some of the most talked about romantic and physically intimate scenes in recent streaming history. She has been informally linked in various reports to a Polish theater director, though she herself has rarely addressed her personal relationships directly in interviews, generally steering conversations back toward her craft and her upcoming projects rather than the tabloid speculation that inevitably follows someone of her profile. This careful management of her public and private life stands as one of the more consistent threads throughout her career, a deliberate choice to let her work speak for her reputation rather than the intense curiosity surrounding her personal circumstances. Simone Cecina. Simone Cecina was born on November 14, 1993, in Linari, a small locality within the metropolitan city of Catania in Sicily, Italy. Growing up in Sicily gave Cecina a connection to the same region that provides the fictional backdrop for much of the criminal world depicted in the 365 Days franchise, an interesting bit of geographic overlap between his real upbringing and the fictional Sicilian mafia setting central to the story he would eventually become part of. Details about his early family life have remained relatively private compared to some of his co-stars, though it is known that he grew up alongside a brother, Danilo Cecina, who went on to build his own career in real estate. Before establishing himself in front of the camera, Cecina built a career as a professional model, a path that began while he was still a student and continued to develop as he gained more experience and recognition within the fashion industry. He was discovered by a modeling agency while still in Sicily, and this early opportunity encouraged him to relocate to Milan, Italy's fashion capital, in pursuit of a more serious modeling career. Once established in Milan, Cecina went on to work with an impressive roster of major international fashion houses and brands over the following years, building a modeling portfolio that included campaigns and appearances connected to labels such as Dolce & Gabbana, Gucci, Chanel, Louis Vuitton, Giorgio Armani, and Yves Saint Laurent, among others. This extensive modeling background gave him a level of camera presence and comfort in front of a lens that would later translate naturally into his work as a screen actor. The transition from small local modeling assignments to campaigns for globally recognized luxury fashion houses did not happen overnight, and Cecina has described his early years in Milan as a period of significant hustle, moving between casting calls and building relationships with agents and photographers who could help open doors within an intensely competitive industry. Modeling for major international houses requires not just physical presentation but also the ability to convey mood, narrative, and brand identity through a single still image or short campaign film, skills that carry over directly into screen acting even though the two disciplines are often treated as entirely separate professions. This overlap between the demands of high-fashion modeling and the demands of dramatic screen performance likely played a role in easing Cecina's eventual transition into acting roles, giving him a foundation in visual storytelling before he ever stepped onto a film set in a speaking role. Cecina's path to broader public recognition in Italy took an interesting turn when he became a contestant on L'Isola dei Famosi, the Italian adaptation of the reality competition franchise Survivor, known internationally in various forms including Celebrity Island. His participation in this widely watched reality show introduced him to a much broader Italian television audience beyond the fashion and modeling world, and demonstrated a different, more personal and unscripted side of his personality that resonated with viewers. This crossover from modeling into mainstream television exposure proved to be an important stepping stone, opening doors to further opportunities in both the modeling and acting industries and helping establish him as a recognizable public figure independent of any single project. Reality competition formats like L'Isola dei Famosi place contestants in physically demanding and socially unpredictable circumstances, stripped of the controlled environment of a fashion shoot or a scripted set, and this kind of exposure often reveals aspects of a public figure's personality and resilience that scripted work simply cannot capture. For Cecina, this experience appears to have functioned as a kind of unofficial audition for the wider Italian entertainment industry, showing producers and audiences alike that he possessed both the physical stamina and the personal charisma to sustain audience interest over an extended competition format, qualities that would later serve him well once he transitioned into more substantial dramatic acting roles. The role that brought Cecina to international attention arrived in 2022, when he was cast as Nacho, whose full name within the story is later revealed to be Marcello Matos, in 365 Days. This day, joining established stars Anna Maria Ciclucca and Michelle Morone in the sequel to one of Netflix's biggest recent hits. His casting represented a significant moment in his acting career, placing him at the center of one of the most anticipated sequel films of the year and introducing him to the massive existing global fan base that the original 365 Days had already cultivated. His portrayal of Nacho, the charming and mysterious figure who complicates Laura and Massimo's marriage, became a defining role in his filmography and significantly expanded his international profile well beyond what his modeling career alone had achieved. Following his breakout role in the 365 Days franchise, Cecina continued building his acting career with additional film work, including a starring role in Heaven and Hell in 2023, a Polish production directed by Tomasz Mendes, one of the same directors behind the 365 Days trilogy, alongside Monika Tears. In that film, Cecina played Max, a young man who becomes romantically involved with an older, successful woman named Olga, a storyline that explores the challenges and complications of a relationship with a significant age gap between its two central characters. This continued collaboration with Mendes reflects the kind of working relationships that often develop between directors and actors after a successful initial collaboration, and it has helped keep Cecina closely associated with the same general style of romantic drama that first brought him widespread attention. On a personal level, Cecina was previously in a relationship with Venezuelan model Mariana Rodriguez, with the two dating for roughly 2 years between 2015 and 2017 before eventually parting ways. In the years following his rise to international fame through 365 Days, this day, Cecina became romantically linked with Brazilian singer Anitta, with reports of their relationship first surfacing around the middle of 2023 after the two were spotted together in Mykonos. This relationship attracted significant media attention given both individuals' substantial public profiles, adding another layer of visibility to Cecina's already rapidly growing international recognition. Outside of his professional and romantic life, Cecina has been described as someone with a strong interest in fitness and physical training, a passion that aligns naturally with both his modeling background and the kind of physically demanding romantic lead roles he has continued to pursue since his breakthrough in the 365 Days franchise. Considered together, Cecina's journey from a young model discovered in Sicily to an internationally recognized actor romantically linked with one of Latin America's biggest music stars illustrates just how quickly a well-timed film role can reshape a public figure's entire trajectory. What began as a modeling career built primarily around fashion campaigns evolved, through reality television exposure and a pivotal casting decision, into a full acting career that continues to expand with each new project, all while his personal life has increasingly become a subject of interest for entertainment media following his rise alongside the 365 Days franchise. Magdalena Lamparska. Magdalena Lamparska was born on January 6, 1988, in Słupsk, a city in the Pomerania region of northern Poland. Her path toward a career in acting led her to Warsaw, where she enrolled at the prestigious Alexander Zelwerowicz State Theatre Academy, one of Poland's foremost institutions for training in dramatic performance. She graduated from this program in 2011, having built a solid technical foundation in acting during a period when Polish theater and drama schools were producing a strong generation of performers who would go on to define the country's film and television landscape over the following decade. Lamparska's career began to gain real traction in Poland even before her graduation, when she landed the role of Marta in the television series 39 I Pole, known in English as 39 and a Half, which aired between 2008 and 2009. This comedy-drama series, centered around a 40-year-old man attempting to reconnect with the carefree spirit of his youth, gave Lamparska her first real taste of national visibility, introducing her to Polish television audiences and establishing her as a performer capable of handling both comedic and dramatic material with equal skill. This early television success helped position her for a steady stream of subsequent roles across Polish film and television throughout the following decade, as she built a reputation as a reliable and versatile working actress within the domestic industry. Over the years following her breakthrough with 39 I Pole, Lamparska continued to build a substantial body of work in Polish cinema and television, taking on roles across a range of genres and formats. Her filmography includes appearances in productions such as Chacho, which marked one of her earlier notable film roles, as well as parts in ongoing series such as Listy Duem, a hugely popular Polish film and television franchise centered around interconnected romantic storylines that has run for many years and multiple installments. She also appeared in the Planeta Singli film series, another significant entry in Poland's contemporary romantic comedy landscape, further cementing her presence within the genre of relationship-focused Polish cinema that has consistently drawn large domestic audiences. Working steadily within these long-running domestic franchises gave Lamparska a level of name recognition within Poland that many international audiences would not fully appreciate until 365 Days brought her to a global stage. Series like Listy Duem function almost like institutions within Polish popular culture, airing new installments on a near-yearly basis and drawing large family audiences during peak holiday release windows, and being a consistent part of that ensemble over an extended period speaks to the kind of reliability and professionalism that Polish producers and directors came to associate with her work. This steady, multi-year presence across some of the country's most commercially successful film franchises gave her a level of financial and professional stability that many actors chasing single breakout roles never achieve, and it laid the groundwork for the international opportunity that would eventually follow. Lamparska's international profile expanded considerably when she was cast as Olga, one of the central supporting characters and Laura's closest friend, in the 365 Days franchise. She appeared in this role across the trilogy, including the original 2020 film and its two sequels, 365 Days, This Day and the Next 365 Days, both released in 2022. Her portrayal of Olga provided a grounding, steady presence within the story, offering a friendship and perspective for Laura's character that stood somewhat apart from the more intense, high-stakes romantic and criminal drama surrounding the central couple. This role introduced Lamparska to a vastly larger international audience than her extensive Polish television and film work had previously reached, given the massive global streaming numbers the franchise generated on Netflix. Beyond her work in the 365 Days trilogy, Lamparska's filmography also includes an appearance in the 2017 film The Zookeeper's Wife, a World War II drama based on a true story that received considerable international attention and distribution, giving her additional exposure to audiences outside Poland even before the 365 Days franchise brought her global recognition on an entirely different scale. This earlier international credit is notable because it shows that Lamparska's crossover into globally distributed cinema did not begin with 365 Days, but rather represented a continuation of opportunities she had already begun pursuing outside the borders of the Polish domestic market. Appearing in a historically grounded war drama also demonstrated a different register of her acting range compared to the romantic comedy work that had defined much of her earlier Polish career, showing the willingness to take on more serious, dramatically weighty material well before she became known internationally for her supporting role in a very different kind of story. Across her career, Lamparska has continued to balance her work between Polish domestic productions, where she remains a well-established and respected performer, and the kind of larger international projects that have introduced her to audiences far beyond her home country's borders. She has also spoken in interviews about her enjoyment of singing as a personal creative outlet outside of her acting career, reflecting a broader artistic sensibility that extends beyond her work in front of the camera, and she has been recognized in the past for her singing ability in competitive settings, adding yet another dimension to her creative profile beyond her primary work as a screen and stage actress. On a personal note, Lamparska has built a life alongside her partner, with reports describing him as a travel blogger and content creator, and she has generally maintained a private but warm public presence, sharing glimpses of her life and career milestones with her audience while keeping the more personal details of her relationship largely out of the spotlight. Lamparska's long-standing career within Poland, stretching back well over a decade before international audiences came to know her through 365 Days, offers a useful contrast to the far more sudden and dramatic fame experienced by some of her co-stars in the franchise, where Cyklaka and Cecina each experienced a rapid, almost overnight surge in international recognition tied directly to their roles in the trilogy. Lamparska arrived at the franchise as an already established and experienced performer within her home country, bringing a level of professional seasoning to her role as Olga that reflects years of prior work across a wide range of Polish film and television productions. This distinction highlights just how differently a single global franchise can intersect with the career trajectories of the performers involved, launching some almost entirely from scratch while adding an important new chapter to the already substantial career of another. Taken together, the four central performers behind 365 Days, this day each arrived at the franchise from very different starting points, an Italian actor and singer shaped by early hardship and years of small television roles before global stardom, a classically trained Polish theater graduate thrust suddenly into international fame, a Sicilian-born model who transitioned from fashion campaigns and reality television into serious acting work, and a veteran Polish actress who had already built a substantial domestic career long before the franchise introduced her to audiences worldwide. Their combined journeys, spanning theater stages, modeling runways, television dramas, and reality competitions, all converged on the same sprawling, controversial, and enormously popular film series, illustrating just how varied the paths to international stardom can genuinely be. That covers the complete life stories of the main casts behind 365 Days, this day. If you enjoyed learning more about the people behind these characters, make sure to hit the like button, share this video with someone who loves the franchise, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next deep dive. See you in the next one. 365 days. This day, budget, production, and funny moments on set. Netflix has never publicly disclosed a precise production budget for 365 days. This day, and this is generally true across the streaming giant's entire film library, since Netflix operates under a business model that keeps individual project budgets confidential rather than reporting them the way traditional theatrical studios often do through box office tracking services. What is known, however, is that the scale of the production expanded considerably compared to the original 2020 film. The first 365 days was a relatively modest Polish production before it ever reached Netflix. Initially released theatrically in Poland where it performed well domestically, grossing approximately $9.5 million at the local box office before Netflix picked it up for global streaming distribution a few months later. That theatrical release model meant the original film's production values, while glossy and visually appealing, were built on a budget appropriate for a mid-sized European theatrical release rather than a full-scale Netflix original production. Everything changed once the first film became a genuine global streaming phenomenon. After 365 days spent an extended stretch as one of the most watched titles on Netflix in numerous countries around the world during 2020, becoming one of the platform's biggest word-of-mouth successes of that year and even ranking among the most searched films on Google globally. Netflix moved quickly to secure the rights to produce the remaining 2 installments of Blanka Lipinska's book trilogy directly. This shift from a licensed acquisition of an already completed foreign film to direct Netflix original production for the sequels meant a significant increase in available resources, since Netflix was now funding the productions from the ground up rather than simply purchasing global streaming rights to a finished Polish theatrical release. Industry observers and entertainment press covering the franchise's expansion widely noted that this shift allowed the sequels to be shot with considerably higher production values, more elaborate location shooting, and a substantially larger overall footprint than the original film had required. One of the clearest signals of Netflix's increased investment in the franchise came in the form of scheduling and logistics. Rather than developing 365 days, this day and its follow-up, the next 365 days, as 2 entirely separate productions spread out over several years, Netflix opted to shoot both films back-to-back in a single extended production period. Principal photography began in May of 2021, starting in Poland before the production moved on to locations throughout Italy. This kind of consolidated shooting schedule, tackling 2 feature films essentially as one continuous production cycle, is a strategy often used to control costs efficiently while still delivering a substantial amount of new content relatively quickly, since many of the same sets, crew members, equipment rentals, and location agreements could be used across both films without the expense and logistical complexity of mobilizing an entirely new production twice. For the cast, this meant an unusually demanding shooting schedule, effectively filming 2 feature-length films' worth of material across a single sustained stretch of production, moving between Polish and Italian locations as the story required. The choice of filming locations played a significant role in the overall production value audiences see on screen, and the producers made full use of some of the most visually striking settings available across both countries. Warsaw served as an important home base for much of the Polish portion of filming, offering the production access to a wide range of architectural styles, upscale restaurants, green urban spaces, and grand private residences that could double convincingly for the kind of luxury environments the story required. Once production moved to Italy, the film leaned heavily into the dramatic natural beauty of Sicily, the region explicitly tied to Massimo's family history within the story itself. Sicily's combination of dramatic coastal scenery, historic architecture, and Mediterranean climate gave the production a visually rich backdrop that reinforced the sense of old-world criminal aristocracy at the heart of the Torricelli family's world. Among the most striking locations used during filming was the monastery of San Nicola Lorena, a former Benedictine monastery and UNESCO World Heritage Site located in the city of Catania. This historic structure, with its imposing stone architecture and centuries of history, provided the backdrop for the film's dramatic climax, lending an appropriately grand and consequential atmosphere to the story's most intense confrontation. Beyond the primary filming locations, the production also made use of a range of smaller settings scattered across both countries to capture the specific texture of different scenes throughout the film, from restaurant interiors and hotel settings to the kind of scenic countryside drives that have become something of a visual signature for the franchise. Producing a film with this much location diversity requires substantial logistical coordination, moving cast, crew, camera equipment, costumes, and production support across international borders while managing the schedules of a small ensemble of increasingly high-profile actors. This kind of production complexity, layered on top of the challenge of shooting two films simultaneously, gives some indication of just how significantly the scale of the operation grew between the modest, single-location shoot of the original film and the sprawling, dual-country, dual-film production that generated both 365 days, this day, and the next 365 days. Coordinating a shoot of this scale typically involves securing permits from local municipalities, negotiating access to privately owned villas and historic sites that are not always accustomed to hosting a major international film production, and managing the sheer volume of equipment, from lighting rigs to camera cranes to wardrobe trailers, that needs to travel between each new setting as the schedule progresses. For a production moving between multiple cities in Poland and multiple regions across Italy within a single continuous shoot, this kind of logistical planning likely represented one of the more demanding aspects of bringing the film to the screen. Requiring a production team capable of managing complex international travel and permitting requirements on top of the more conventional creative and technical demands of filmmaking itself. The financial gamble Netflix took in committing to this expanded production ultimately proved justified by the numbers. Despite continuing to receive largely negative reviews from professional film critics, much like its predecessor, 365 Days, this day repeated the pattern of the original film upon its April 2022 release, drawing enormous viewership numbers on the platform and generating substantial social media conversation around the world. This commercial performance, even in the face of consistently poor critical reception, underscored the particular dynamic that has defined the entire franchise since its debut, a series of films that consistently struggle to win over critics while nonetheless drawing some of the largest audiences of any given release window on Netflix. A pattern that has made the franchise one of the platform's more commercially reliable, if critically maligned, properties. This gap between critical reception and audience viewership is itself one of the more interesting business stories surrounding the franchise's production history. Streaming platforms like Netflix generally place enormous weight on raw viewership data and completion rates when deciding whether to greenlight sequels or expand a franchise's budget, often prioritizing these engagement metrics over the kind of critical consensus that might have deterred a more traditional theatrical studio from investing further in a property that had been almost universally panned by professional reviewers. The original 365 Days actually holds the distinction of appearing on lists of some of the most poorly reviewed films to nonetheless achieve enormous commercial success on a major streaming platform, and Netflix's decision to commit to not just one but two full-length sequels, shot simultaneously with an expanded international production footprint, reflects just how heavily the platform weighted the raw audience numbers over the critical drubbing the original film received. This business calculation ultimately proved sound, since both sequels went on to replicate the viewership success of the original despite facing similarly harsh reviews upon release, reinforcing Netflix's original bet that audience appetite for the franchise's particular blend of melodrama, glamour, and controversy would remain strong regardless of critical opinion. Turning to what actually happened on set during production, several patterns emerge from cast interviews and behind-the-scenes accounts describing the unusual atmosphere of shooting a franchise built so heavily around scenes of intense physical and emotional intimacy. Anyone stepping onto the set of any installment in the 365 Days franchise faces a fairly unique professional challenge compared to most other film productions, since so much of the material demands not just typical dramatic performance, but a level of physical closeness and choreography usually reserved for far smaller portions of most films. Michel Morrone has spoken candidly in past interviews about how strange this dynamic initially felt when production first began on the franchise, describing the early experience of filming such physically intense scenes as something that took real adjustment, even for an experienced actor. He has explained that despite his general commitment to bringing authenticity to every role he takes on, there was an undeniable strangeness to the process at first, particularly given how quickly he and Anna Maria Ciclucca needed to build a working rapport given the intensity of what the material demanded of them almost immediately. What emerges consistently across various interviews and behind-the-scenes discussions is that this initial awkwardness gradually transformed into something closer to genuine camaraderie, and even outright comedy once cast and crew settled into the rhythm of production. Morrone has described how the discomfort of certain scenes would frequently break down into actual laughter on set, with crew members occasionally struggling to maintain professional composure during particularly elaborate or unusual staging, which in turn would set off a chain reaction among the actors themselves. He has recounted one particular sequence, involving an intimate encounter staged in the tight confines of a private airplane cabin, as an especially memorable example of this dynamic. The scene required the use of prosthetic devices to simulate physical contact convincingly without requiring the actors to actually engage in that contact directly, a fairly standard practice for staging this kind of material safely and professionally. Morrone has described the resulting experience as undeniably awkward from a practical standpoint, fumbling with unfamiliar props and hitting his marks under bright lighting and a room full of crew members, but ultimately more funny than anything else, especially once the crew itself began cracking up at the sheer absurdity of what they were all collectively trying to pull off with a straight face. Scenes of this nature typically require an unusually large number of people standing just out of frame compared to a normal dramatic scene, including an intimacy coordinator, camera operators positioning shots to convey passion without capturing anything the production isn't intending to show, continuity staff tracking the exact placement of props and prosthetics between takes, and often a director calling out adjustments in real time as the scene is refined across multiple takes. This crowded, technically demanding environment, combined with material that is inherently a little absurd to perform in front of an audience of colleagues rather than in private, appears to be a near-universal source of nervous laughter and broken takes across nearly every production that attempts scenes of this scale and frequency. Morrone's account of the crew's composure breaking down mid-scene reflects a fairly common experience described by actors working on similarly staged productions, where the sheer number of technical considerations layered on top of already unusual material creates a kind of pressure valve that often releases as spontaneous laughter rather than professional frustration. Beyond the technical mechanics of staging these particular scenes, Morrone has also spoken about the broader emotional adjustment required to perform this kind of material convincingly while maintaining a clear separation between his own personal identity and the character of Massimo, a man whose behavior toward women within the story is frequently controlling and, by any reasonable real-world standard, abusive. He has expressed concern in past interviews about the risk of audiences conflating his own personality and values with those of his on-screen character, taking care to draw a clear distinction between Michel Morrone, a father who has spoken openly about the importance fatherhood holds in his life, and Massimo Torricelli, a fictional mafia boss whose treatment of the women in his life the franchise itself does not present as a model for real-world relationships. This tension between performing a controversial character convincingly and maintaining a clear personal boundary from that character's values appears to have been a recurring topic of conversation and reflection for Morrone throughout the production of all three films in the trilogy. This kind of shared, slightly absurd camaraderie appears to have carried through the production of the sequels as well, especially given how much more time the cast spent together shooting 2 films back-to-back rather than a single standalone feature. By the time production began on 365 days, this day, Morrone and Ciclucca had already spent considerable time working together, and had developed the kind of easy familiarity that comes from having already navigated the unusual professional demands of the first film together. Various behind-the-scenes clips and social media posts shared by the cast during and after production capture moments of the 2 actors breaking character and laughing together between takes, a marked contrast to the high-tension, high-stakes emotional material their characters are portraying on screen. Morrone has described their working relationship in interviews as having evolved into genuine friendship over the course of filming multiple installments together, noting that this comfort level made it considerably easier to approach even the most demanding scenes with a sense of professional ease rather than the nervous uncertainty that surrounded the original production. The introduction of Simone Cecina into the cast for 365 days. This day added an entirely new dynamic to the set, given that he arrived without any prior professional acting credits, stepping into a major role in one of Netflix's most anticipated sequels as his very first credited acting performance. This unusual starting point for a screen career naturally generated its own share of memorable moments during filming, as Cecina navigated the process of learning to act professionally in real time while simultaneously working alongside 2 established, camera-comfortable co-stars in Morrone and Ciclucca. The announcement of Cecina's casting itself became something of a viral moment before filming had even concluded, when Morrone shared a shirtless photo of the 2 of them together on social media to confirm his new co-star's addition to the franchise, a post that ended up drawing millions of likes and setting off an enormous wave of fan anticipation and social media commentary well before the film's actual release. This kind of pre-release viral moment, generated almost entirely by a casual social media post rather than any official studio marketing push, speaks to just how much organic public interest surrounded every new development connected to the franchise by this point in its run. Cecina has spoken in interviews about the particular challenge of essentially learning to act on the job, given that his previous professional background centered almost entirely around modeling campaigns for major international fashion houses and a stint on Italian reality television rather than any formal dramatic training. He has described being drawn toward acting specifically because of an interest in the transformative aspect of the craft, the challenge and novelty of becoming someone else entirely rather than simply representing a brand or a look the way modeling work typically requires. This lack of formal training reportedly made for some genuinely funny moments during his early days on set, as more experienced members of the cast and crew helped walk him through basic elements of film blocking, continuity, and camera awareness that seasoned actors often take entirely for granted. Rather than becoming a source of tension, this dynamic appears to have fostered a supportive, almost mentorship-style relationship between Cecina and his more experienced co-stars, with Morrone in particular taking on something of an informal guiding role for his newer castmate throughout the production. The adjustment from modeling to acting involves a surprisingly large number of small technical habits that most working actors absorb early in their training and rarely think about consciously, from remembering to hit a precise mark on the floor without looking down to find it, to maintaining continuity of small physical gestures across multiple takes shot from different camera angles, to understanding how much energy and projection a performance needs to read correctly on camera versus how a model might present themselves for a still photograph or a short-form campaign video. Cecina has acknowledged that his modeling background, while providing him with genuine ease and confidence in front of a camera lens, did not automatically translate into the kind of sustained, character-driven performance that a feature film role demands, and he has described the early days of production as something of a crash course in these fundamentals, learning largely through direct observation of his more experienced co-stars and through patient guidance from the directors overseeing his performance. This kind of on-set learning curve, while occasionally a source of good-natured teasing from castmates who had already been through the process themselves, ultimately appears to have been treated by the production as a normal and unremarkable part of introducing a new performer to a major franchise role, rather than any kind of serious obstacle to completing the film successfully. Cecina's reality television background from his appearance on the Italian version of Survivor several years before his acting debut also gave him a different kind of camera comfort compared to a completely untested newcomer. Since reality competition formats require contestants to perform authentically and engagingly in front of cameras for extended stretches under physically and emotionally demanding circumstances. While this experience differs considerably from scripted dramatic performance, it likely provided him with a baseline level of comfort being observed and filmed continuously that helped ease at least some of the adjustment to working on a major scripted film production for the first time. Cast and crew members who worked alongside him during this period have generally described him as a quick study, someone whose natural charisma and camera presence, honed through years of modeling and his prior television appearance, allowed him to close the technical gap between himself and his more experienced co-stars relatively quickly over the course of the production. The technical challenge of filming Morrone in the dual role of both Massimo and his previously unknown twin brother Adriano introduced its own layer of behind-the-scenes complexity to the production of 365 Days, This Day. Portraying two visually identical characters within the same film generally requires a combination of careful scheduling, the use of a stand-in double or a body double for reverse angle shots, and meticulous continuity tracking to ensure that subtle differences in costuming, posture, and mannerism remain consistent for each character across every scene in which they appear separately or, in certain sequences, together in the same frame. Morrone has shared glimpses of his preparation process for stepping into the role of Adriano through his own social media channels around the time of the film's release, offering fans a look at the kind of subtle physical and behavioral adjustments he worked to develop in order to distinguish the two brothers despite their identical appearance. Playing two characters who share an identical face but diverge sharply in temperament and history gave Morrone an unusual creative challenge quite different from anything the franchise had previously required of him, and fan reaction to the eventual reveal of Adriano's existence within the story generated an enormous amount of social media discussion. Much of it centered on good-natured confusion over how exactly Massimo had managed to keep an identical twin brother a secret for the entirety of the first film and the opening stretch of the sequel. Productions that require an actor to appear as two distinct characters within the same scene generally rely on a technique often referred to as a motion control shot, in which the camera repeats an identical, mechanically precise movement across two separate takes, once with the actor performing as one character and once as the other, before the two takes are combined seamlessly during post-production editing. Alternatively, productions sometimes rely on a body double standing in for the reverse angle or off-camera portion of a two-character scene, with the double's face obscured or positioned away from the camera so that the visual illusion of two identical brothers occupying the same space remains convincing to the audience. Whichever specific technique the production used for its own dual-role sequences, the process inevitably demands additional takes, additional camera setup time, and an unusually high level of coordination between the actor, the camera department, and the editing team compared to a standard single-character scene, adding meaningfully to the overall shooting schedule for any sequence requiring both Massimo and Adriano to appear together. For Morrone personally, the challenge extended well beyond the technical logistics of the shot itself and into the performance work required to make two visually identical characters feel genuinely distinct to an audience watching the finished film. Actors tackling dual roles of this kind often develop small, consistent physical tics or vocal patterns unique to each character, subtle enough to avoid feeling like an obvious costume change but distinct enough that an attentive viewer can sense the difference between the two even before the story explicitly clarifies which brother is on screen in a given scene. Fan discussion following the film's release frequently referenced moments where Morrone's body language or vocal tone shifted just enough to signal Adriano's colder, more unstable presence compared to Massimo's more familiar, controlled demeanor. suggesting that whatever specific choices Morone made in crafting the two performances succeeded in creating a meaningful sense of distinction for at least a portion of the audience paying close attention to these details. Beyond the more technical and performance-focused aspects of production, cast members have also described the general atmosphere of shooting on location in Sicily and other picturesque Italian settings as something that lent a genuinely enjoyable,